I knew the staff I wanted to put together. There's always so much going on ever since I got here. It took up a lot of my time. Finally, I've been able to find people who believe in what we are trying to do and who I am very comfortable with. I like our staff very much now with Scott, Luke, Ken, Mike, Pager. We filled some holes.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and you can find me on Twitter at redrock_bball, the same for Instagram and facebook.com/redrockbasketball. And of course this podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. If you are looking to become or looking to apply for a job with the Locked On Podcast Network, we're looking for a national sales manager, so send your resume through to lockedonpodcasts@gmail.com if you think that you would fit that role. We're going to talk today about the Sacramento Kings, look back at their 2016 and 17 season, see what we can make out with this team, although it's quite a confusing squad to look back at, just given the uncertainty at so many different positions, the big changes that went through last season. We're gonna battle through all of that and try and find some information for you guys in Dynasty Leagues or you people who just like basketball. So,
let's get to it.
Let's get to it indeed. We'll start by talking about this Kings team and how things went for them last season. They finished the year with 32 victories, 50 losses. They overperformed their expected win-loss by just one win, so basically right on where they needed to be. It wasn't too much of an underperforming season or an overperforming season. Basically, bang on with another season of them finding themselves in the bottom 10 records in the league. But thanks to some trades, definitely, they found themselves with two top 10 draft picks. They end up with pick 5, pick 10, and pick 34, which is their own second rounder. Pick 10 they got from the New Orleans Pelicans in exchange for DeMarcus Cousins. Pick 5 comes via the Philadelphia 76ers as part of the pick swap. It would have been pick 3 had it not been for the Stauskas trade with the Sixers.
The worst trade deal maybe ever signed anywhere, but certainly ever signed in this country.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So that was that trade that, again, is going to cost the Kings an unprotected 2019 first rounder as well. But the thing is that they also win, which is a weird thing to say from this deal, is that, yes, their pick moved up from pick 8 to pick 3, but they also find themselves now with pick 5. So if they hadn't have moved up, if they hadn't had the luck to move up to pick 3 and then lose that pick, they wouldn't have ended up with pick 5. They would have ended up with pick 8. So in a weird way, they improved, but didn't improve their pick as much as they could have. It's a very weird circumstance where the trade was terrible. They lost on a top 3 pick, but because that pick swap actually activated, they still ended up with a higher pick than what they would have if the pick swap didn't actually activate. So a weird turn of events, and now the Kings have got 2 top 10 picks for them to try and stuff up. I have a little bit more faith in the Kings drafting at the moment. Maybe they make a deal and package those and move up. Maybe they look to move to the top 3. Maybe they look to move to pick 4 and send both those picks. I don't know, but I am almost 100% sure that with one of those selections, they'll be looking at a point guard. Now, whether that's De'Aaron Fox, whether that's Dennis Smith, who falls down to pick 5, whether it's Frank Ntilikina, maybe at pick 10, they look at Frank. And then they could look at a wing player. Maybe they take an Isaac at 5. Maybe they take Tatum if he falls down to pick 5 and look to get another point guard at pick 10 if one of those guys like Ntilikina is still around. Maybe Malik Monk is interesting to them at pick 5, although I doubt it given Buddy Hield is on the team. There are numerous ways they can go. Lauri Markkanen at pick 10 perhaps as a stretch 4 for this team. They've got a number of different options, but I'd be stunned if they didn't get a point guard. I guess it depends what happens in those first 4 picks as to whether they go ahead and grab one at 5, but I would be assuming that they're going to be red hot on a guy like De'Aaron Fox there at pick 5 if he happens to slip to that spot. Free agency for this team is going to be a really interesting thing because there is numerous players who are big contributors on this team who are unrestricted free agents. We know that Rudy Gay has opted out of his player option, so he is an unrestricted free agent, and he is also coming off a torn Achilles tendon, so that's an interesting situation in itself. But Gay is an unrestricted free agent. Tyreek Evans, who came across in the Boogie Cousins trade, is an unrestricted free agent. Darren Collison, their starting point guard, is an unrestricted free agent. Ty Lawson, their sometimes starting point guard, is an unrestricted free agent. We've got Aaron Aflalo with a non-guaranteed deal for $12.5 million. He was shithouse. Maybe they get rid of him. I would. They've got Anthony Tolliver, who's got an $8 million non-guaranteed deal for next year. Do they cut him? Who knows? It looks like Skal Labissiere is going to be their starting power forward. So where does Tolliver fit in? Is $8 million a good price for a backup? Yeah, it's not too bad. Langston Galloway's got a $5.3 million player option, which we haven't heard about yet, whether he will be picking that up. But he might be gone. And $5.3 million for Langston Galloway, I think, is a pretty good price tag. And then they also have the restricted free agency of Ben McLemore, which is a really, really interesting one as to whether he actually returns. And I would think that he doesn't, to be honest, given the way that this team is currently set up and where their assets currently are. I'm not sure that McLemore comes back. And I think he's been treated harshly at times in Sacramento by some of the coaching, especially when he headed into that pivotal third year under George Karl, and he was stuffed around quite a bit, and I believe that hampered his development. But we don't know exactly what's going to be happening with him. So a lot of question marks. Numerous teams that we've covered so far in these season in reviews, they haven't had they haven't had really any free agency question marks. But this team, you could be looking at losing two starters with Collison and Gay, and then in Collison's backup in Lawson, Aflalo, who started big amounts of games. Not that that's a loss, but numerous players could be moving, and you're bringing in 2 picks and 3 top 35 picks. So some guys who could be getting some rotation minutes. Also, a guy we'll talk about a little bit later on, Bogdan Bogdanovic, who could be coming over, although it does appear that he won't be, but we will see on that. That's still up in the air. The other thing that could be happening with the point guards for them is Milos Teodosic. Vlade Divac is pretty keen to get him across and been scouting him, and he could come over and become their starting point guard. They've got a huge opening there. Do they bring Teodosic over to start for a year or two before the rookie gets ready for it, ready for that job, whether it is Fox or Smith or Ntilikina or whoever it is? But Teodosic is an option as well for the Kings to bring over in free agency, and Vlade seems pretty keen or pretty confident that he's going to be able to convince Milos to come across and become their point guards. And he would be a really interesting fantasy target just for his ability to get assists. His defense is horrendous, but his assist ability could be a real fantasy factor. So there is a lot of stuff happening, and it's a team in flux. We saw them in their new form for 25 games post All-Star break. And even then, it wasn't fully fledged. No Gay guys, 3-4 guys resting every single game. It was really hard to get a full picture on exactly what was going on with the Kings. Last year, they were the 23rd team in pace. They had the 21st best offensive rating and 25th best defensive rating, so nothing positive to hang your hat on there with any of that. They were 27th in turnover, 26th in offensive rebounding percentage, and 28th in total rebounds. So a lot of bad numbers. The best thing I can say for the Kings in terms of those numbers is they were 5th in the NBA in three-point percentage, so they were hitting their threes and hitting them obviously at a pretty high rate, and that's something which they would love to be able to continue. That's helped, of course, by the way Buddy Hield played when he came across, but that's a really nice, foundation to build upon for this team. DeMarcus Cousins led this team in so many statistical categories that you'll see some of the other leaders in some areas are so far down because Cousins just dominated everything for this team, and we're not going to include him in the leaders. If we look at who the highest offensive rating was on the team, it was Collison, trailed by Tolliver, Lawson, and then Labissiere. Best defensive rating, it was Cousins, of course, and then behind that, it was Cauley Stein, Gay, Kufos, and Labissiere. So you see the one name that's appeared on both of those lists is Skal Labissiere, who had a very, very strong end to the season, and I think he could turn out to be one of Divac's best draft picks. Getting him at pick 28 last year was a steal at the time, and it looks even more so like that at the moment. I think when we did the redraft of the 2016 redraft the other day, I believe we had Skull going in the top 10, which seems about right to me. They had 5 blokes shoot over 40% from 3 in general, which obviously helped for that 5th ranking in 3-point percentage. Galloway, Tyreek, Heald, Collison and Aflalo, and 8 people shot over 40% on corner threes. An interesting number from the shooting splits on this team is that Malachi Richardson, yes, in limited playing time, shot 75% at the rim. That's a huge number for a rookie guard who you don't expect him to have these massive finishing numbers. That's huge. Kufos, Cauley Stein, Papagiannis, all are over 70% at the rim, and that makes sense, all the big men, but it's good to see them actually be able to finish at that rate. And Cauley Stein was a guy we were really concerned about with his field goal percentage and his finishing, given how piss poor he was at the start of the year and in Summer League where he was atrocious. Good to be able to actually see him finish off some of these plays. We saw Bud Hield with some ridiculous mid-range shooting numbers, 58% between 3 and 10 feet and 54% between 10 and 16 feet. They are crazy, crazy numbers for Hield to be able to shoot from mid-range, and he was really good when he arrived in Sacramento. Let's have a look at the advanced stats leaders. Rudy Gay, this is all excluding Boogie, of course. Rudy Gay at 17.9 led the team in PER. Hield had the highest true shooting at 60%, which is huge for a rookie guard. That's absolutely massive, while Tyreek, that usage percentage at 26. Win shares went to Dazza Collison at 3.9, and win shares per 48 was Cauley Stein at 0.1. Offensive box score plus minus, Collison and Hield led there, while Willie Cauley Stein led in defensive box score plus minus, and Gay led in overall box score plus minus. But to give you an indication of how different it was, Rudy Gay led the team in box score plus minus at 0.7. Cousins had 7.1. So we're talking a 10 times factor between Cousins, who is not there anymore, versus the guy who actually ended up leading the team. It's just a massive difference. While Garrett Temple was the leader on the team in VORP at 1.0. They only had 2 lineups play over 100 minutes together, and some of that was due to flux of players coming in and out and the way that Jaeger consistently changed his rotations. He was one of the most frustrating coaches from a fantasy point of view, just seemingly changed the starting lineup every single game, could never settle on anything, and then we see no sort of consistency with only two lineups going over 100 minutes. Their most used lineup was Aflalo, Cousins, Gay, Kufos, and Lawson, and that was a plus 1.4, and of their 20 most used lineups, the best lineup was Barnes, Collison, Cousins, Lawson, and Tolliver, which was a plus 34.9, but they played just 43 minutes together. And it is absolutely incredible to me that over the course of the season, 82 games by 48 minutes, that you could only have 2 lineups play 100 minutes. It is bafflingly ridiculous to me that only 2 lineups played that much together. Just craziness. Their best 4-man lineup, Collison, Cousins, Gay, and Kufos at a plus 15.3, which is part of their standard starting lineup. And Collison was in all of their best 5 4-man lineups. So I hated the way that he was used down the end of the season, Collison, but he was pretty strong for this team. Their most used 4-man was Aflalo, Cousins, Collison, and Kufos, and that was a negative 6.8, while Aflalo, Collison, and Cousins as a negative 8.4 as their most used 3-man lineup as well. In the 2-man lineups, DeMarcus Cousins was in the 4 best of those ones. Unsurprisingly, I'm sure you'd be aware of that. Now, stash players, they've got a few of them. Let's talk about the number 1 guy that most people will want to hear about, and that is Bogdan Bogdanovic, who plays for Fenerbahce over in Turkey. I saw something yesterday or today that it seems unlikely that he will come across. There is obviously the Serbian connection for him with Vlade Divac. I don't know if Vlade can convince him to come across. If you're unaware who Bogdan is, he's a 6'6 wing player. He's 24 years of age, and he just led Fenerbahce to the Euro title. He averaged 14 points, 3.6 boards, 3.9 assists, and 1.1 steals in 28 minutes. He shot 40% from 3, 50% from the field, and 88% from the line, which converted to a true shooting of 64%. He had a PER of 21, a usage of 25, and a net rating of 16. So honestly, he was fantastic. And if he came across to this team for next season, you could make the argument that he would slot straight into Rudy Gay's starting small forward spot, even though he is a little bit undersized and he is more of a ball handler. But having him, there's a secondary ball handler at 6'6 alongside Hield, and then have whoever they bring in as point guard, or even have him just play the backup behind Bud Hield. He's going to be a valuable NBA player. Think of a Bradley Beal type. He's not as good as Bradley Beal, but that's the sort of game that he's got. The scoring, the shooting, the threes, the passing. That's the sort of player that Bogdanovic can be. And if he found himself in a role of 30-plus minutes, you'd easily have a top 70 fantasy guy, I believe, with Bogdanovic, if he comes over and if he finds himself in that role. But he is one of the most exciting stash players that are around. I'd say it's him and probably Ante Zizic of the Celtics, the two best guys in Europe to come across and have an impact. But Bogdanovic, really exciting if he happens to come. But at this point, I would say it's less than 50% chance that he does come over, but it's far from a done deal, of course, at this point. The other two guys who they got as part of that Philadelphia pick swap cap space clearing deal, Arturas Gudaitis, the Lithuanian who's playing for, and I'm going to pronounce this incorrectly, Lietuvos Rytas. He averaged 11.5 points, 7 boards, 0.9 assists, and 1.5 blocks in 21 minutes with a PER of 26. He had a usage of 24 and a true shooting of 63 and a monster net rating of plus 28. He's a 23-year-old, 6'10" power forward. I don't really think he's ever going to be an impactful guy in the NBA. And the other guy who is a player who I think will be less impactful, who came across in that Philadelphia deal, is Luka Mitrovic, who's a 6'8" wing. He's 24 years of age. He plays in the Serbian league for KK Crvena Zvezda. I'm sure that's incorrect as well. He averaged just 5.5 points with 4 boards and 2 assists in his 18 minutes with a PER of only 13, a true shooting of 54, and a usage of 18 numbers, which obviously are not ideal, so I wouldn't be holding out much hope for him. Gudaitis is a guy that in a 30-team league you'd pay a marginal amount of attention to. He could come out and carve out maybe a 15 to 17 minute a night role at some point and be a decent rebounder and shot blocker, and that has its uses. He's not a massive free throw drain. He can score a little bit, but Mitrovic, I wouldn't be holding my breath for him to come and do anything. Gudaitis is the guy there, but obviously Bogdanovic is the player. And just to clear up any confusion, he's not related to the Washington Wizards' Bojan Bogdanovic. They're not brothers, they're not cousins, they're from different countries. Bojan is Croatian, Bogdan is Serbian. You see that mixed up all the time. Bogdan's a better player, I think. I think he's got a better fantasy upside as well. All right, let's get into talking about these players who do remain or did remain on the Kings after that trade. And we'll start with their number one player, and that was Rudy Gay, who was the 29th ranked player for the season. Obviously, we only saw him for 30 games as he tore his Achilles tendon. He played 34 minutes a night and averaged 18.7 points, 1.5 threes, 6.5 boards, 2.5 assists, 1.5 steals, and just missed out on getting the triple one by having 0.9 blocks. He was at 46 and 86 and shot 37% from 3. So good numbers from Gay, fantastic numbers. We saw a bounce back from him after a Rajon Rondo-induced fall the year before. He bounced back, but now we're talking about a guy that is trying to recover from a torn Achilles. He's 30 years of age. Your guys recovering from Achilleses don't come back the same. Brandon Jennings, Anderson Varejao, he's out of the league now. Wes Matthews, they don't come back the same. So expecting Gay to come back to this level, I think you'd be incorrect to assume that. Now, he was fantastic. He led the team in on-off numbers at a plus 9.2, which was huge. He was by far, outside of Cousins, their best fantasy asset. But when is he going to be back? Will he be back to start the season? He tore his Achilles halfway through, in the middle of January, halfway through January. So is he back before December? Maybe. Where does he go? I'd be really cautious with expecting. I wouldn't expect a top 75 season from Gay this year, despite how good he's been and how consistent he's been with his numbers recently. I just don't see it in a rehab sort of setting for him where he might only play 2/3, half a season, probably 2/3 of a season. I just don't see it for Gay, and I also just don't see. I think you'll see a big hit in his field goal percentage as he has less lift in his shot, and that will cause him to go from a 46% shooter, which he's been for the past 4 years. Maybe he becomes a 44% shooter. Maybe that costs him, instead of 18 points a game, he becomes a 15-point-a-game guy. The threes drop, the defensive steals and blocks drop as well. So I think that we have seen the end of Rudy Gay, top 50 player. And that's something that you do need to pay attention to, obviously, in dynasty formats. Darren Collison started the season suspended with that domestic violence ban. He came back and he ended up playing 68 games down the stretch. He was getting rotated in and out of the lineup by Jaeger as they were resting guys left, right, and centre. He ended up playing 30 minutes a night in 68 games, averaging 13 points with a 3 a game, 2.5 rebounds, 4.5 assists, and a steal. And as per usual with Collison, he was super efficient as he shot 48% from the field and 42% from 3 for a tremendous true shooting of 57%. Collison wasn't as good as he's been back in the 2014-15 season where he was a top 40 player. He was about the same as what he was last year when he had to share time with Rajon Rondo. I did not like the way that Jaeger used him. I hated that he only played 30 minutes. He should have been getting the 34. He's a much better player, in my opinion, than Ty Lawson. I think that Jaeger did limit what Collison could do. But he did end up leading the team in minutes. I just would have hoped for a little bit more of that. His defense dropped off a little bit this season. It wasn't quite as good as where it had been. And the real question is where is Collison next season? Do the Kings bring him back? Does he move to another team as a backup? I think him as a 20-minute a game backup is his best role. I'd be interested to see him go to the Knicks because he is a guy that can score and can do it efficiently and can help a guy like Kristaps Porzingis space the court as well. So I think that there is definitely some yes, there's going to be appeal for him from some teams. Does he end up going to the Pelicans, a team that he used to play for? If Drew Holiday happens to leave, where he had some fantastic times over there, does he head back there? I don't think that we're going to see him back in Sacramento, and his value is really on a knife's edge at the moment. He is 29 years of age, which is something to pay attention to. So he's sort of just past his prime, and I think he just settles into a 22. Maybe he goes and becomes a backup for the Wizards. Maybe that, although I don't think they've got the cap space to really pull that off. He is an underrated player, Collison, but his fantasy value is very precarious at the moment, and I'm not sure that he can. I'm 100% confident he's not going to be a top 50 guy again, and I think it's going to be a stretch for him to be a top 80 player, and maybe even to be a top 100 player. But again, it depends entirely on where he goes. But his season was far from a disaster. He takes care of the ball. He's efficient. And all those things are really useful. Just the defensive stuff is a concern, considering how small he actually is. Let's look at Garrett Temple, a player who I don't like as a player. From all reports, he's a great bloke, superb bloke, good teammate, does a lot of good stuff on the court. But for fantasy, he's just not brilliant. He's not a good ball handler. He gets put into roles where I just don't believe he should be getting that sort of playing time. He played 27 minutes a game for the Kings here, averaged just 7.8 points. Far from ideal. 1.3 triples, 3 boards, 2.5 assists, 1.3 steals, and shot 42.78 with 37% from 3. Wholly average numbers. The only thing really positive about Temple was his steal numbers, and that's really it. That was the only positive contribution he had in terms of fantasy categories, and that doesn't mean that he was a write-off. He was the 127th ranked player for the year, and in fact, he crept inside the top 100 in head-to-head ranks after the All-Star break. But he's just a very limited upside player. The Kings were 1.6 points per 100 possessions better off with him on the bench, which I think would be a surprise to a lot of people who look at him and he just makes winning plays, and in the end, the Kings were actually worse off with him on the court. There's obviously lots of noise that goes into that, but this is a season-long sample. And he is just a guy that offers very little from a fantasy point of view. He's a guy that you can add in as a steals specialist, you can add in as a threes streamer, and that's probably all it is for him. Now, he's going to remain on this team, and with the potential departure of Lawson, Collison, and Evans, and McLemore, the minutes are going to be there for him. He played at the 3 as well when Gay went down. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a very similar type of season from Temple, a guy that doesn't score, plays 27 minutes a night, hits a 3 a game, gets 1.5 threes, 1.5 steals, and maybe 2.5 assists, and does it with solidly average percentages. And that's more a 14 to 16 team type of guy to me, rather than a 12 team guy. Even though you look at his rank and he's the 127th player for the season, I don't believe that makes him a 12-team league guy necessarily. Ty Lawson, Ended up playing 25 minutes a night in his 69 games.
Giggity.
10 points, half a three, which is horrendous. 2.5 rebounds, 5 assists, 1 steal. 45% is good. 80% from the line is also good, but 29% from three is clearly horrendous. Lawson was pretty similar pre and post All-Star, but he did up his scoring after the break, averaging 12, 2.5, and 6 with a steal a game, and shot 50% from the field, which was huge. And he saw his ranking come in from 161 to 114. Where does Lawson fit now? I think he's the inferior player between him and Collison. Do they look to bring him back after him signing for a minimum deal and giving him more money to become the backup, or maybe a spot starter? But again, there's just so many irons in the fire here. Pick 5, pick 10, Teodosic. What does this team actually do with this point guard spot? Lawson, I really struggle to think that he's going to become a top 100 player again. His numbers were okay during the season, still struggles defensively, very small. Obviously has the off-court character issues with the alcohol stuff where he broke probation during the season. Obviously lots of concerns with that, and I'd only be looking to bring him in on a really cheap deal, $2-3 million as to be a backup. Maybe he heads to New York as well. Maybe he's another, all these places that I mentioned for Collison, maybe he goes to New Orleans, but he's a backup. He's a 20-minute-a-night guy, I believe, maybe 21 or 22, who finds himself as a top 200 player pretty comfortably, and he dishes those assists and becomes a streaming option, even for standard leagues, just because of those assist numbers. But I put him well behind Collison in terms of an impact player. Not that Collison's really an impact player, but I think Lawson's even less so of one of those. Tyreek. His numbers when he arrived in Sacramento, they weren't great. He was still limited with that knee problem. He had like 3 knee surgeries in the 12 months prior to the season, and then was still unable to play back-to-back games by the end of the year. He only ended up playing 15 games back in his second stint in Sacramento, 23 minutes a night, 11, 3.5, and 2.5. He hit 1.5 threes a game, which is fantastic for him in 23 minutes. He was at 0.9 steals and 41% shooting, 71 from the line and 43% from three. If we look at what Tyreek did rankings-wise, 205th post-All-Star, 224th before that. And where does he actually fit into the league? Do Sacramento bring him back on a cheap deal and be one of those wing players on this team as a ball handler, secondary ball handler type? You wouldn't say that he endeared himself to the organisation all that much in that second. Well, not endeared himself. You wouldn't say that his play made them go, yep, we've got to bring Tyreek back. But where else does he end up going? I think his time as a 30-minute player is done. And that's unfortunate because he's a top 50 fantasy guy when he gets that sort of playing time with his ability to rack up assists. He hits some threes now, he gets steals, he's rebounding, he's scoring. He might be a frustrating player to watch from an on-court perspective, but when he's out there, those minutes really rack, or those stats really rack up, and that's something we always need to draw a definition between when talking fantasy, is that a player like Tyreek Evans, and you'll see him go out there and you go, look at that, he was top 40, he was top 40, he was top 40, all these numbers, bang, 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 bang. But you watch him, you go, this can't continue because he's shit. And Brandon and I, as we talked about on the Suns podcast, the same thing. You go, look, these are great. These numbers are there, but he puts up the numbers when he gets minutes. But how long can he actually keep getting solid minutes for? And I reckon we're at that spot for Tyreek now, especially with the persistent knee problems that he's had. You just feel like that's just never going to go away. He's never going to shake those off. He's only 27, so he has still got some time up his sleeve, but nothing about his time in Sacramento gave me massive faith in him being able to be a starter-level player really anywhere outside from one of the lower maybe he goes to Brooklyn. He'd be an interesting fit in Brooklyn with that open shooting guard position where Randy Foye was. Maybe he goes there. That would be an interesting move. And if Evans goes to a spot where he plays 30 minutes, it would need to be one of those spots, but the numbers make him a top 75 guy easily. You just got that injury risk that's associated, and you would hope that he won't have any restrictions heading into next season, given how long those restrictions have been on. You'd think at some point they would have to disappear. Evans was a team worst negative 8.4 in his on-off numbers, which is clearly horrible. The next closest in terms of badness was my mate Aaron Aflalo, who remains one of the worst players in the NBA. Let's talk Willie Cauley-Stein, a player that many people want to talk about. He's the 213th ranked player for the season. He averaged just 19 minutes on the season. But the real story is what happened when Boogie went. Because Cauley-Stein was forced into a bigger role. And I wasn't a massive fan of Cauley-Stein. And I'm still not a huge fan. But he was impressive. He was the 77th ranked player in total value post All-Star break. His head-to-head value went from 285th to 85th. He played 30 minutes a night and had 12.7 points, 7.8 boards, 2 assists, which is really impressive, those assist numbers, 1.1 steals, 0.9 blocks, 50 and 73 as his percentages. So some pretty significant changes from the sort of play we were getting from Cauley-Stein to begin the season. He did see his field goal percentage for the year drop. He was at 56 last year, and that took a big nosedive down to 53. But his free throws did take a jump, and I liked the way that his free throw percentage looked in that second half of the season. With Cousins gone, you would have to pencil Cauley-Stein in to be the starter next season. I don't think that the Kings are taking a center at pick 10 or pick 5 for that matter. Maybe they take Zach Collins at pick 10, but I think you'll see Cauley-Stein being the 30-minute a game guy at center and being a really comfortable top 100 player. A guy that could easily average the 13 and 8 that he averaged at the end of the season with a steal and a block on 50 and 73. Those numbers are absolutely fine, and as he heads into his third season, could we see him be a 15 and 8 guy with 1.5 blocks? That's the thing that really needs to come up, the blocks, and he can be this 1.2 steals, 1.5 blocks guy. I am sure of that. So I think that he has got sneaky top 50 upside. I don't think I would ever draft him in that spot, but he is going to go in that top 80 zone almost without any doubt. I'm still not sold on him. I think he's a better option than Georgios Papagiannis, and I think that Labissiere is not really going to become a center. So I think that the Labissiere, Cauley-Stein 4-5 combination is what they're going to want to build on moving forward. So I think if you do have Cauley-Stein in a fantasy league, I would expect 3-4 seasons of rankings between 80 and 50. At least. He's still got to grow. He's still got to get the efficiency up. He's still got to get the shot blocking up. But we saw some increased passing ability from Cauley-Stein, and it wouldn't be a massive stretch to see his assists go to 3.2 per game, up from the 2 that he averaged post All-Star. I wouldn't be stunned at that because he did handle the ball more and looked way more comfortable and was impressive after a horrendous start. Well, he was shit house. He was out of the rotation, dreadful to start the year, but a very strong end to the year from Cauley-Stein, and it was impressive. So the opportunity is definitely going to be there for him moving forward. Bud Hield. Wasn't a big Bud fan in New Orleans. I think that's pretty fair to say. You'd all be aware of my criticisms of him. And part of that, he was the 281st ranked player pre-All-Star break. Post-All-Star, 112th. So that's a big jump, clearly. The Kings were a negative 0.2 with him on-off, about even. So not much of a change there. Let's have a look what he did when he arrived in Sacramento. He only played 29 minutes a game, so there's massive scope for that to increase. 14.5 points, 2.3 threes, 4 rebounds, 1.7 assists, 0.8 steals, and the most impressive thing probably is the 48, 81, 43 slash line with his percentages. Super percentages. 60% true shooting is obviously ridiculous from Hield. The question I have with him from a fantasy point of view is, what can he do? He can score, he can hit threes, and he can do it efficiently. Yeah. What else does he do? And that's the problem. Nothing is the answer. You're rebounding 4 a game. That's not bad. 1.7 assists, that's not doing anything. 0.8 steals, can he ever get to 1.3? I'm not convinced his defense is anywhere near that level. Now, he is still young, but he's not that young. So how much room for growth does he still have? He's 23 years of age already. We know that I think his upside is fairly low in terms of developing into a star or a superstar. But a guy that can come in and have 16 points a game with 2.5 threes on 48% shooting is a solid option on the wing. I don't think that he is going to play under 30 minutes a game for next season. I just think that his upside is limited by his actual skill set and the fact that he is the age that he is. And my concerns for him still remain. My big concern with him heading into the season was he did it for 1 year in college. Like, he wasn't good in his freshman and sophomore years. Wasn't good. He was okay in his junior year, but definitely not spectacular. And his senior year was fantastic. But that doesn't normally translate into great success in the NBA, and it looked like that was going to be the case for his time in New Orleans. He did step it up in Sacramento, but he wasn't the greatest. He wasn't like blowing everyone's doors off and putting up top 40 type numbers. I just don't think he's ever going to get there, but I feel safe to say that you'll get 15 points and 2 threes a game from Hield next year, and you should get it done pretty efficiently. He just doesn't get to the line very often, and any of those other peripheral stats he's going to lack in, and that's going to really restrict his overall fantasy value as we move forward. Costa Koufos. He was the starter for big chunks of the season. 71 games, 20 minutes a game. He's a really effective player. 6.5 points, 5.5 boards, half a steal, half a block, 55% from the field, a true shooting of 56%. He's a solid player. With Cauley-Stein, with Papagiannis, with Labissiere, all heading into their third or second years next year, where does Koufos fit in? Well, I feel pretty confident in saying he won't be starting next season, and I think that him even as a backup center might be a struggle if they go with Papagiannis at that route, which they could very well do considering the way that you're just played towards the end of the season. So where does that lead Koufos as we move forward? Now, Koufos' numbers for the he was 166th post All-Star, 204th pre, so they're nice, but he's more of a 20-team league sort of a player, and yeah, he's a guy that whenever he's asked to step into a starting role, he has use. He's a double-double guy with high field goal percentage and can block some shots, and that's useful. But he's never going to really get better from here, and it's probably just going to be a downward spiral, I guess, with Koufos' career from here on out. Anthony Tolliver, 23 minutes a game in 65 games for Tolliver, 7 points, 1.5 threes, 44% shooting, 39 from three. That's who he is. He's a stretch four that hits those threes. With Labissiere around now, I think that Tolliver may struggle to back up those numbers. Now, I said his contract is non-guaranteed. He's got $8 million owing on him for next season. Whether the Kings guarantee that and bring him back remains to be seen. I think they probably will, but I think his impact's going to be limited. He is a streaming option for threes. Yeah, if you get 1.5 a game in 22 minutes, that's nice, but him getting to those 22 minutes is probably going to be a tough ask, I reckon, at this point. Good true shooting, good efficiency, decent advanced numbers, nothing spectacular, but also nothing terrible. And he just sort of is what he is. He's an average 9th man in the NBA, and that puts him as a player who you look at probably in 30-team leagues only, and he's a fringe 20-team leaguer, I would guess. 226th pre-All-Star, 256 post-All-Star. That's sort of where he is, and you stream him for threes, and that's really about it with big Anthony Tolliver. We move on from him to a player with a much higher level of interest, and that's Labissiere. Scal played only 33 games. He was stuck in Reno for the majority of the beginning of the season. He ended up playing just 19 minutes a game for the season. But let's flick to what happened for him post All-Star. He had 26 games at 22 minutes a pop, 10 points, 5.5 rebounds. He had half a steal, half a block on 54% from the field. He shot 38 from three and 70% from the free throw line. Now, he didn't take hardly any threes a game. In fact, he only took 0.3 three-point attempts per game, but he still was an improvement. 425th pre-All-Star, 194th post. The team was basically dead even with him with his on-off numbers. What do we see from Labissiere moving forward? Well, I see a guy that can play 30 a night. I see a guy that can score 13 points, that can get 6 boards, but importantly, that can get you maybe 0.5 threes, a steal, maybe 1.2 blocks, and do it relatively efficiently. I think that Cauley-Stein will probably be ahead of him for next season in terms of value and rankings, but Labissiere's got the ability to handle the ball. He can pass it, he can dribble it, he can bring the ball up, and I think he's got massive scope to improve. He is a young player. We talk about Hield not being necessarily that young, but Labissiere is just 20 years of age. He posted an above average PER of 16.9, a 58% true shooting, an average win shares per 48. His box score stuff wasn't great, his plus minus. He's still got lots of room to improve, but I was super impressed with what we saw from Labissiere in that second half of the season, and I think that he will have some top 100 seasons coming up for him. Whether that's next season or not, I'm not sure. I wouldn't be holding my breath for that. I would be looking at him more as a top 150 guy for next season, but I think that you could... we saw him have some absolutely massive explosions and then other times get dominated. And we remember that that massive explosion came against Phoenix, who had the worst defensive front court in the NBA at that point, and that did really enable Skal to go off. And when he played against some bigger teams and some stronger teams, he didn't do anything. And that's where he does need to improve. So to me, he is a last round flyer sort of a guy, a player who can have a few top 100 seasons, but I'm not sold on him ever becoming a true superstar or a truly consistent top 50 fantasy guy. But the Labissiere-Cauley-Stein frontcourt is what they're going to be looking at moving forward, and I think it's got a real chance of working and being productive for both of those guys. So Skal obviously was an impressive player through that second half of the season, something to give the Kings fans a fair degree of hope. Their other first-round draft choice, or one of their other first-round draft choices, was Georgios Papagiannis, who was missing for the start of the season. He was terrible. He was terrible at Summer League. He looked fat and unfit. We saw him at Reno. He didn't really do too much. But then towards the end of the season, he started coming on. He only played 22 games for the season, and just 3 of those before the All-Star break. After the break, 19 games, 18 minutes, 6.5 and 4.5, with a block a game on 55% from the field and 86% from the line. There's some nice numbers for Georgios. He moved from 373rd in rankings in those 3 games to 180th. The team was only 1.7 points worse off with him on the court versus on the bench, which is better than Willie Cauley-Stein, who was a negative 2.8. Better than Aflalo, better than Ben McLemore. So he wasn't a complete write-off in that sense, and showed some things at the end of the year. I still have him fairly firmly behind Cauley-Stein and behind Labissiere in terms of talent level and where they fit in the franchise and their overall fantasy value. But Papagiannis showed us some things. He showed us that he's not a complete write-off. He showed us that he does have work to do, but there's a base there for him to become Costa Koufos. And I'm not using that comparison because they're both Greek. Papagiannis has a much better head of hair. But that's the sort of guy they can be. Scoring, rebounding, do it efficiently, but he adds the added bonus of being able to be a free throw shooter, and I think he can be a pretty strong shot blocker. He had the highest block percentage on the team at 4.4%. The next highest was Boogie at 3.5%, and Koufos at 3.1%. So he can be. It's not unrealistic to think of him as being an 11 and 10 guy with 2 blocks if he found himself into a starting role. I just don't think that will happen next year. The dude's only 19 years of age, so 4 years younger than Cauley-Stein. That's a significant difference. And Papagiannis is a long-term dynasty investment. While I said I like what Cauley-Stein did and I like what he did and what he can do next year, I think that probably if you want to look 8 years down the track, maybe Georgios can equal him in that track. But for the time being, Cauley-Stein is in that spot. But both guys do struggle with their offensive game. There's still a fair bit of work to do for both of them, especially Georgios at this point. And I think next season will still be another development one for him. And maybe he does find himself behind Koufos again next year. But I wouldn't be so sure because the impressive stuff we saw from him in the second half should be a good way to carry that across. And I'll be interested to see exactly how he goes through Summer League, whether he looks a little bit more dominant than what he was. Big Aaron Aflalo, Azza. He remains one of the worst rotation players in the NBA, in my opinion. He played 61 games and 26 minutes a night. Just horrendous. He should never be playing that. He scored only 8 points a game. He hit a 3. He's just bad. He offers nothing. No rebounds, 2 rebounds, 1 assist, 0.4 steals, 0.1 blocks, 44% from the field, 41% from 3. So that was impressive from Aflalo. But he's just a really bad player. He had a PER of 9. So if that tells you anything, he had a box score plus minus of negative 3.5, which is horrible. A well below average win shares number. A big negative in his VORP. He's just a bad player. I don't know whether they will guarantee his $12 million deal. I wouldn't. You've got Hield. You could potentially bring Evans back. You've got Malachi Richardson. You've got Garrett Temple at that position. What the hell does Aflalo offer you? Nothing. Get rid of him. I don't see any point in having Aflalo. Or if you do, don't play him. But Jaeger played him the 5th most minutes on the entire team last year, although he was one of those guys that got cycled out of the rotation at the end of the season when they were tanking / giving some extra minutes to the younger players. He is a bad fantasy player. He will never become a good fantasy player again. He was the 283rd ranked guy pre-All-Star, 214th post. He's a 30-team league guy at best. He's bad. I don't know how many more times I can tell you. He's just a bad player, and that's where I am with Aaron Aflalo. Langston Galloway. I like Langston Galloway. I thought that the Knicks were dumb to, and you could just cut that soundbite and use it all the time. The Knicks were dumb to rescind his qualifying offer on restricted free agency. He signed a super cheap deal in New Orleans, and then he came across as part of the DeMarcus Cousins trade. He only played 20 minutes a game for the season, and only 19 minutes in the 20 games that he played for Sacramento, averaging 6 points, 1.8 rebounds, and 1.5 assists. So the numbers, they're far from spectacular. He only hit 40% of his shots. He did hit a 3 a game, but nothing too spectacular for Galloway. But I like him. If you're going to lose Collison and Lawson and they get bigger deals elsewhere, you bring in a rookie point guard. Maybe you do bring in Teodosic. Having a Teodosic, Fox, Galloway, Heald, Richardson as your 5 guards. They're all young, exception of Teodosic, obviously. They're all young, and they've all got room to grow. I really like what Langston can do for this team. I think that they should. He's got a player option, and whether he picks it up or not, it remains to be seen. It is only $5 million, so maybe not. But he was a plus 6.8 for this Sacramento team with his on-off numbers. I don't think he's ever going to become a top 100 guy. He's more of a deeper league player, but I think he can genuinely be a 9th or 10th man on an NBA team and do that for 4 or 5 years and be okay at it. Handle the ball a little bit, shoot a little bit, play some good defense, do some pick and roll stuff. I think he can do that. Play on the ball, play off the ball. I think he has value, and he's still only 25 years of age, so another 2-3 years, I think he can do that. He can play through that and be a useful player. It's just never going to develop into a great fantasy option for him. Got 2 guys left, 2 more shooting guards. Benny McLemore. I had some pretty big hope in McLemore a couple of years ago. He obviously didn't live up to that, but after his second season, he was the 126th ranked player in fantasy leagues, playing 33 minutes a night, averaging 12, 3, and 1.5. Hit 1.5 threes, and I thought, here we go. All right, take another step forward, become that top 100 guy, and let's push forward. Until George Karl arrived and screwed it up. He was pathetic in that 3rd season, Karl and McLemore, ranking 257th and playing only 21 minutes a night, and things got worse under Dave Jaeger, where he played only 19 minutes in 61 games. So there's a couple of things here. He's a restricted free agent. I don't think he's back. He's not taking the role off Buddy Hield. There's Malachi Richardson, who's still 19 years. Oh, no, sorry. No, he's not. What am I talking about? Malachi's not. He's 21. Still a young guy there like Richardson who is around who can take that role. Now, McLemore's only 23, but from what I understand, that McLemore probably won't be back in Sacramento. And he's had opportunities, but he's never really taken it by the scruff and being able to fully stamp himself. Now, could he become a rotation player on another team? Yes. Is his fantasy upside huge? Not really. But one thing that does stand out with Ben is his ability to rebound. He is a super rebounder for his position, so that, along with some threes, and do it at decent efficiency. Like his last post-All-Star, he shot 45% from the field, which is a really big improvement on what he did for the season, where he was at 43 and hit 40% of his threes over that time as well. Got almost 4 rebounds a game. That can be useful, but assists are non-existent. Defensive stuff, non-existent. You're talking about scoring, rebounding, threes, and hopefully some improving efficiency. But I think it's going to be hard to see McLemore remain as a player in Sacramento or find himself any role where he gets 30 minutes a night. But I'm not out on him totally. I still think that in deeper sort of formats, deeper dynasty leagues, you could look at Ben and say, all right, I think there's a bit of upside there. If it costs me nothing to acquire him and I can just sit him on a bench and my roster's deep enough, there might be something there where he could become a top 160 player for the next 2 to 3 years in the right environment. And that could be something that, depending on the size of your league, getting that for free might actually work. And I don't think he's completely a complete write-off, but he's also struggling, and I don't really see much of a future for him in Sacramento, unfortunately. The last player is their other first-round draft choice, And that's Malachi Richardson. We didn't get to see a massive amount of Richardson, only 22 games for him, and that included just 2 after the All-Star break as he tore his hamstring, and that required him to miss quite a bit of time. He averaged 9 minutes a game, 3.5 points, half a three, 41, 79, and 29 as his percentages. I didn't have very big hopes for Richardson heading into the season. His statistical translations were horrendous. Nothing about his stats here proved that wrong. He was bad. But on-court play, I got a little bit of excitement from him. I thought, okay, there's a little bit of something here. Now, I don't think he ever really turns into a good fantasy player, given the strengths of his game. But in terms of being a rotational shooting guard, yeah, sure, he can be that guy. And that might give him an opportunity to become a top 250 guy at some point. But I don't have much faith in him. You talk about guys that were picked in that range, him, Karras, Levert, even you stretch it out to Zubac, Brogdon, those guys, Labissiere later in the first round. I'd rather have all those guys over Richardson. I just don't think that he is all that exciting of a player, but with some openings there, with Evans potentially going, McLemore going, Collison, Lawson, there's going to be some minutes opening up for Richardson. I know the Kings fans were pretty interested in what they saw from him before that hamstring, and he started to play pretty well before that hamstring injury, in fact. So he is a guy that I would expect have a real... Look, he was 420th this year. I would expect a big jump. I would expect him to become a top 300 player next season, and that's a pretty significant jump, and maybe even a top 250 guy. But I don't really see any top 100 seasons in his future, and I think that he's probably just going to be that rotational guy. And this is something that we need to really pay attention to, especially when you head into dynasty rookie drafts and talking about the draft. I just spent all this time talking about Ben McLemore. He was the 8th pick in the draft or 7th pick in the draft, and people talk about, oh, look at this guy, he was a top 10 pick in the draft. So many of these guys don't work out. They don't turn into anything. Stauskas. Cauley Stein was the 6th pick in the draft. Emmanuel Mudiay lost his spot in the rotation this season, and he's just his second year. And I think Mudiay will be fine. But these players in the top 10, they don't work out. So many of them just don't provide anything. So getting overly excited about so many guys based on draft position is not the way to go about it. Now, Richardson's obviously different because he falls down at pick 22. But the likelihood of that turning into someone good is pretty low, and I don't think that Richardson's going to be that guy that bucks that trend. Let's have a look at the questions that you guys asked. Jordan, who's at 416 Basketball, do you 100% buy Buddy Hield's numbers with the Kings? Do I 100% buy them? No. Do I think that they are sustainable 90%? Yeah. I think that he can become a 40% three-point shooter. I don't buy the 55% mid-range shooting that I detailed earlier on. I don't think that's going to continue, and that's going to probably hurt his overall field goal percentage, which, 48% with the Kings? I reckon that's probably high, and I would be looking more as a 45 sort of a guy. But getting 40% from 3, I don't think is a real unrealistic expectation. But as I detail with Hield, it's like, what else happens? Does he get steals, assists? Does any of that stuff start to come? I'm not so sure that it does. Maybe he can get a steal a game. That's a possibility, but I do like his steal numbers. I just don't think, his percentages. I just don't think they stay quite at that level. Joe Buck, assuming that Sacramento focuses on picking up a point guard and wing in the draft, and there are no trades, how do you see their front court rotation going? Well, I think it's Labissiere and Cauley Stein at the 4-5, and I think Papianis is the backup there. And if they keep Tolliver, he'll be the backup 4, and you get Kufos in there in that mix as well. A wing, there's obviously a huge opening there at the 3, so if they get their hands on a Tatum and Isaac at that pick, then at pick 10, or if they decide to go that route at pick 5, then they could find themselves getting 30 minutes a night pretty much immediately. So there is a big opening there on the wing. Josh says, near the end of the season, Scull showed flashes of playmaking ability. Is it an anomaly or something we can expect going forward? No, he can handle the ball. He used to be a point guard growing up, as so many of these guys did, but he was a point guard for a long time. He ran point guard on on the Kings Summer League team when they had no point guards. He was the point guard. He took the ball up from a made basket. He was the point guard. He can handle the ball. He can play make. So no, it's not an anomaly, and that will start to develop more for him. Danny Triella, how many years do you think it will take for the Kings to reach the playoffs? I say at least 5. And I don't think you're far off with that. I would guess 4 to 5. It's already been 12 years, I think. It's been a long time. I reckon 4 to 5 is about right. Kevin Carlson, what sort of potential do you think Scal has from a pure fantasy standpoint? I touched on that a little bit earlier, Kevin. I think he can be. A top 100 guy. Not sure how it goes next season, but yeah, I've talked about that one. David Laliberte, the Kings need a point guard of the future. What do you think of them trading for Rozier if they don't pick up a point guard in the draft? Maybe for Cauley Stein if they believe in Labissiere as a center. A couple of things to touch on here. Rozier is not the point guard of the future for anybody, in my opinion. I really don't see him being a point guard of the future. I don't think that they would... Maybe they think Scal's a center. I don't think they think that. I reckon they see him as a 4, as a stretch 4. I don't think they see him as a center. And I honestly don't see why they would target Rozier as a point. Maybe Rozier can do it. He's had an impressive playoffs. The Celtics are obviously out now, but he's had some pretty good times in the playoffs. I just don't think that he is someone you should be looking at as your point guard from the future, and pick 5 for them is what they should be looking at. John Murphy, after the Cousins trade, Cauley Stein averaged 13 and 8 with a steal and a block, as we talked about. Do you think that's projectable to next year? As I touched on earlier, yes. I think it's pretty realistic. Do you see the Kings moving on from McLemore and Kufos? McLemore, yes. I don't see him back. Kufos, I guess it depends if they can find someone who is willing to take on his contract, which is not exorbitant, but it's not ideal. I think more likely than not, the Kufos remains on the Kings, depending on what they do with the trades. But he's not going to be a key part of what they do. I don't think we're going to see Kufos starting as we did for so much of the season next to Cousins, which was just a dumb shit move from Jaeger for the majority of the time. I hated that move to start him there. I think you'll find him down the pecking order a fair amount this coming season, with Labissiere, Cauley Stein, probably Papagiannis, all ahead of him on the list. And then Eric throws in a cheeky question: rank these players: Buddy Hield, Seth Curry, Steph Curry, Dell Curry. I think you know who's won it. It's clearly Steph. Then it's Dell. Then it's Seth. Then it's Hield. I'm not a big Hield fan, as you know. He can score. I don't think he's that good, but he showed a fair amount in his time in Sacramento to give the Kings fans a little bit of hope. But I wouldn't be pinning your hopes on him becoming your next All-Star. Is all I'll say with that. All right. That's all for the Sacramento Kings preview. We're going to be back with the Orlando Magic preview tomorrow. We'll talk about all the sorts of shit that went down with Frank Vogel and that team, the upheaval in their front office. So make sure you are subscribed to this podcast, whether that's on Google Play, on Stitcher, on iTunes, or on TuneIn Radio. Listen to the rest of the Locked On Podcast Network as well, all our team-specific podcasts where you get the local angle on the big news of the day for each team. So check out all those. Go listen to Locked On Kings with Jason Ross, of course, who gives great information on the Kings and has a ton of great guests come on his show. If you do want to support this podcast, head to patreon.com/redrock_bball. We are done here, guys. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Vlade Divac.